Welcome to Playing Above the Line. We're a podcast that takes a peek into the daily lives of community and business leaders. Each week, we uncover different views of the path to growth, leadership, and achieving success. I'm Dennis Sheeran.
And I'm Alan Cave. Dennis and I are both shareholders at Hartman, Blackman & Kilgore. We're a full-service accounting and business consulting firm. As CPAs, we've had the unique opportunity to work with many different leaders and decided we wanted a way to share their incredible stories that we've learned along the way.
All right, Alan, welcome to the show today. What we got going on today?
Well, Dennis, it's always a good day when we can have a fellow Brutonian in the studio with us.
Brutonian?
So, is that a word, Brutonian? I think so. Brutonian? One of those. From Bruton. He's from Bruton. Owen Milligan's with us today. Owen, thanks for making the trip up 65 to join us.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit about you and what you do in Bruton.
I'm the owner of Hurri-Clean, an emergency service contracting company that has grown to provide solutions for commercial and industrial clients and properties. Basically all over the country. We'll go wherever we're needed to assist in a time of need, whether it be a regional disaster or something that's localized or any sort of problem at all that disrupts the business or your livelihood that's associated with the business.
So we're talking about things like hurricanes. I mean, hurricane blows through, floods out your building. You take your equipment in, dry it out, do whatever needs to be done to get it up to work again, right?
Absolutely. Clean, healthy, safe, dry. Those are the tasks that we intend to accomplish. Okay. So that can be temporary environmental controls, that can be generalized cleaning, that can be providing temporary office space or housing, catering, anything, again, to prevent the business from being disrupted is what this has morphed into in a sense where originally it started as structural drying. You run into a situation where a building's wet, be it a hurricane or a tidal wave or a broken pipe or whatever that case may be. And then we realize that these people that are being disrupted because of that are suffering so many other infractions due to the collateral effects of their business being closed. So, one aspect of the business is focused on the value of the material that is being affected. And then the bigger focus of our business is on the damage or disruption that's created when those materials are. So if you got a piece of sheetrock that's wet, you say, no problem. At home, I'll cut it out and we'll just close this hallway. And, well, when you got a business that's generating hundreds of thousands of dollars a day in some case in revenue, you can't just close the door for a little while. We have to get creative and think outside the box to do whatever we got to do to keep these people up, moving, and operational in some capacity so that we don't dip into, stale time of disruption for them.
It's kind of an interesting business, an interesting niche that you find yourself in. So how did you get there? I mean, you graduated from Miller just like I did, went to Troy. So how did you find yourself providing these types of services all across the country?
Well, my father, I give him a ton of credit here. I was poised to be a third-generation contractor. He was a contractor, built custom homes, and I think without saying, everybody just kind of thought that when I got through running my course through college that I'd come home and get in that business. In the meantime, he realized that there was a niche there that was not filled. He'd build a house. A year later, they'd have an issue, and they would struggle to find somebody to come in and actually do that preparatory work, to do the cleaning, to do the demolition, whatever the case is. So we talked about it, and he said, hey, maybe you need to go this direction, and we can continue to work together, but not necessarily on the same focus. So that's a huge advantage we had. I could borrow from his side of the table to get things done, of course, with his help and input all along the way. But my skill sets were developed from a contractor's mentality rather than a janitorial mentality. And again, there was nothing wrong with coming from that side, but the majority of the guys that are in our business did come purely from the cleaning side of things, which is fine because we're talking about finished surfaces. If you're going to clean this wall, they say, hey, that looks like semi-gloss paint. We should be able to wipe it down with this chemical using that material. And that was how they looked at things versus I knew what was behind that wall and what potentially could be looming or what the cause of this issue was. And when we decided to push into the commercial and industrial realm, that's when our services became so much more valuable to these people because we had the tools and equipment and experience and knowledge behind us to actually use a little foresight and get ahead of the curve on some of these things. We use the analogy all the time. It's like driving a John boat versus steering a barge. If you come around the bend in a tugboat pushing a huge barge and you realize you're headed the wrong direction, you don't just whip the steering wheel and start going the other way. You've really got to prepare for what's coming that you may not see. So when you're dealing with massive amounts of cubic footage, the sensitivities that we have today, because of the environments we have created that we would consider norm, 50 years ago, I'm 45 years old almost, and I still remember certainly many, many, many comfortable nights with the windows up and the attic fan on. Today, if we tried to do that, people would scream because of all the contaminants and pollutants and gases and everything else that we're pulling across our poor, helpless, innocent children's little faces. But, that's the environment we've created. And due to that, the business that we're in and controlling those environments in an emergency scenario became that much more important because you've got so much cubic footage in this huge office space. If somebody turns the air conditioner off, that is a big problem today. It wasn't 15 years ago because they say, well, no problem. Let's open these windows. Windows don't open anymore. If we were to turn the air conditioners off in the Superdome while that stadium was loaded out with people, it would take about 16 hours for rain clouds to actually accumulate and rain to physically fall from the sky inside the Superdome. That's how much moisture that mechanical system is wringing out of the air. So you can imagine you get in the RSA tower downtown here and it's loaded up with people and all sorts of things going on, and the power goes out or the thermostats malfunction or whatever the case is, you got a big problem, and it's time to bring some equipment in there and get things back on track.
You obviously deal in some pretty high stress times. I mean, you come in and somebody's building's flooded out, or and like you said, they're losing revenue every time, every click of that clock can. I mean, that's money that they're losing. So I would think that you have to kind of not only be able to come in and perform technically, but you kind of have to act as a little bit of a counselor, maybe, for lack of a better word. I mean, you've got to deal with a lot of emotions, I guess is what I'm saying. So, I mean, how does that play out in your world? What skills have you kind of drawn on to keep tempers calm and that kind of thing, dealing with so many issues and so many problems, so many different people?
Well, you've got to establish a good, solid point of contact right away. You need to find that person on the job. Sometimes it's the facility administrator. Sometimes it's the guy that holds the keys for the janitor. Every different property's got a different scenario where things typically play through. Once you've established that, then certainly you've got to explain to them that this is not your first rodeo in said situation. I hope it never happens. I've never had a house fire. If it ever did, it would be the first house fire I've ever had. So I try to keep that in mind when I make it to these places, that whatever's happening could very well be the first time it's ever happened. And I've seen it time and time and time again. Even with some of these guys that are, say, administrators through the county or the city, they've been in a position, and as long as everything's going good, they're the best administrator that county's ever had on the side of emergency and disaster preparedness. When there's an emergency or disaster, all right, now let's flip back and look at the preparedness indicator. Oh, wow, now everybody's exposed. So we try to limit that exposure to those people, take on the burden if we can, have ready-made solutions that are offered, and I try to tell the guys up front, good, fast, cheap, you pick two, and we'll get started right now. So that works.
Can't have all three.
Like
that's
that.
right. That works any way you like.
Yeah.
You want it good and fast, no problem. You want it good and cheap, no problem. But I just need to know what their expectations are and what really drives them, and then we can tailor our services to them. I've been in so many situations, and it's nice to see these people recover. We're with them, holding their hands throughout the process. Now, some of these guys, they do it all the time, and they're rock solid. They're way tougher than I would be in such a situation if their training exists. And then there are other guys that seem to be crumbling. And if you don't have something ready for them, then absolutely, we joke on the inside. And I know this will be public information at this point, but sometimes the disaster begins within.
Right.
They just thought they had a problem. When we show up, they got a real problem then, because I can point out everything that they didn't know was around that bin. And once they start to see that, hey, we got to sit down and talk about it up front before this happens, before that consultant shows up, before this insurance carrier limits this, or before you realize that everything's, coming down, coming out, coming apart, whatever the case is. But you push it all out there on the table and then say, now let me tell you what I can offer in terms of experience and solutions to get us out of this situation. At that point, you've already seen what kind of disaster truly is lying before you, and you've already picked a route to navigate through it. And it's very, you just get a huge sense of accomplishment when you're able to not only open the door on the building, but realize that not just that guy there who was taking his worries home, who's got a family, and who all the other little ripples in the pond that seems to be effects are going to be minimized. And it's gratifying for sure to be able to say, I played a hand in solving this problem and preventing things from flipping to the other side, because I don't have the stat in front of me, but I know it's out there. There's so many of these businesses that are affected by disasters will never reopen. And I know it's greater than 50%. It's a moving target. But, you mentioned Mexico Beach, for instance. That's a place where if you've got anything left, you pack up and you go. That's just the mentality of so many people there, that I'll never be able to put this back like it was. Now, you've got a handful of people that say, not only am I going to put it back like it was, I'm going to put it back better. And you can team up with those people and really get to move forward, and it's gratifying. Again, is the term, that you're able to do something. And I'm not trying to make more out of it. I'm there to make a living, certainly, but if I can aid or assist these people in some way, it does make you feel warm and fuzzy on the inside. So yeah, we did a plant in Indiana that produced a product that moved directly to the mother plant, if you could use that term. And that shipment had to be, there every 15 minutes, every day, around the clock, or the assembly line would stop. They had a large fire, and, we flew up, and I'm talking to the guys about solutions. And, I say, now we can go this route, bud. And I could sense the anxiety that he was experiencing and trying to calm him down. And he said, this plant that we're working for will fine us $10,000 a minute when we disrupt their production. Because not only was that little seat frame that goes in the back of that van important, but without that seat frame being there on time, then the hubcap guy, the windshield wiper dude, the tire chief, all those guys are at a standstill. And those are some of the economic ripples that you would experience. And when I realized that he was kind of worn and looked as though he had a rough night, he threw the number $10,000 a minute at me. He was counseling me before it was over with, because those are things that, it's hard to prepare for. But those are things that happen behind the scenes that you don't realize. And that's not a misquote. That's $10,000 a minute. Wow. That's big. So they need a solution, and they need it now. Wow. And you got to do something. And it doesn't matter if it comes in on a blimp or a helicopter, or time is the critical issue for these places. Obviously, if you total up $10,000 a minute, well, if you close that building for a day, it doesn't make sense from an economic standpoint, because you could have built an entirely new manufacturing facility for that, but you don't have the time to do it. So you're looking down the barrel of that. Disruption, again, is the word we continue to go back to, and you got to do something to get those guys going. It's got to be healthy, clean, and safe to reoccupy. So a lot of unique situations and parameters that you come into. And again, that will make you feel good when you're able to get things back on track and know that you're saving your client money, time, jobs, everything else,
So you talked about that you've traveled numbers of places throughout the country. How did that network of connections come about?
Well, that's what I can credit my father with. I never realized the value of a relationship until they started to pay off, for the lack of better terms. He stressed with me how you should treat people and how you should do your job, and put all those other things aside. And I know he didn't coin the phrase, but I've heard him say many times, there's two ways to do something, the right way or again. So we just try to make sure we do things the right way. And unfortunately, in our industry, and if there's somebody out there that's going to be listening to this that is in our industry, I apologize. And I'm not necessarily referencing you, maybe, but this is this pretty rough and crude world that we're in, because there are opportunities there, and you can jump into my business today and present yourself with the same size business card that I carry, and because of that, there's been a lot of skepticism in the world of our clients. They really want you to prove yourself. When they've got $10,000 a minute at stake, they don't want to, well, I'm going to let Johnny cut my grass and let's see if he gets the blower out or if he's just going to. No. At that point in time, you don't have an opportunity to go through the trial and error process. So I tried to make sure that we did things the right way. Sometimes it cost us money. Sometimes it cost the client money, but we endured and everybody was happy at the end of the project, but made sure that we established a reputation of being in, an elite company. Another one of my dad's friends says that cream rises to the top, and he spent his entire life in the neck of the bottle. And that's where we want to be. Right. Yeah. That's where we want to be. So again, it goes back to good, fast, or cheap. And you can't let those outside factors control how you're going to do your job. If somebody comes to me and says, hey, we want to compromise, at that point in time, I can let them know, hey, we've got other things to do, or we'll go home and twiddle our thumbs before we'll let this affect our reputation. That reputation has led to us establishing a network of contacts that know they can call us, and we don't have to go through a bunch of, well, this is what I'd really like for you to do. They know how we're going to do it. And if somebody calls us, then they're serious about getting it done. That's the way I look at it, and I treat them all like that. Everybody has high stakes. It might not cost $10,000 a minute if Alan's out of commission, but you know what? I treat it just the same. It's just as important to get him up and running. So that led to a small network of people. And of course, just like any other relationship, that guy's going to be talking in front of his other 5 friends, and 2 of those guys are going to call me. And next thing you know, I can literally tell you that I've got friends in 50 states, some of which we've never worked with, some of which we talk with, and consultants, and many of those guys are the ones that I'm calling to find out, what's going on or how things work or what did you do under these circumstances. And don't be afraid to reach out to those guys. And we have a real open forum. I'd certainly rather expose myself as not knowing exactly what to do in this situation. A huge pot of collard greens explodes at a factory. I've never done that before, So let me reach out to somebody that I feel like has been in the food processing industry and talk to them. And, as long as you can openly admit that to the client, the guys that you're working with, and everybody knows, hey, I might not have the answer right now, but I'm getting it, and reaching out to those guys that I trust has been vital in us working in all the areas that we have. A lot of that goes to them.
So I get back to this concept of you working under some pretty high pressure scenarios, and you work with a lot of times the people who control the checkbook and would be considered the leaders of their organizations or whatever it is that you're working with. So is there a trait or two that's kind of resonated with you as far as you look at these guys and you say, all right, this guy I can tell he's a leader. He's a great leader. He's got characteristic A, B, C that kind of makes me think that. I mean, is there something that you've seen?
Yeah, without a doubt. I'd always heard that a great manager surrounds himself with people that are smarter than he is or she is. And when I meet somebody on the job that wants to tell me how to do things, I feel like they may be cast in the wrong role with their company. It's not my place to say that. And we work with and through those guys. But more times than not, it's exposed eventually that might not be in his wheelhouse. The guys that say, I want to talk to you, I want to get to know you and what you're about, I want to see what you do, and as soon as I feel comfortable, you're going to be one of those guys that we consider to be smarter than us in this field, and we're going to let you run with it. Those guys oftentimes save their company money, they save their company time, and they get a better job done. Because when I show up at your disaster, it's because I just left another disaster. And there might not be anything on the news today, but I assure you things are happening. We're in more than one state right now working, and it never went across the ticker on TV. It's just things that network has found, and those guys refer to us because it is what they consider to be a niche need, and we can fulfill that. So we're experienced. We've got the equipment, and we got the personnel. We've got the proper training. And as soon as they feel comfortable with that and let us go with it, I say, hey, this is the kind of guy that I'd like to line up with when it's time to go to war. The leader doesn't necessarily have to be up front. Let's say that. Otherwise, our commander-in-chief would be wearing camouflage every day. But, he gets a lot done from the White House out in the field. And that's how I see the guys that we're working for that I prefer to go back to. And there have been some clients that we satisfied that I may not be working with in the future. And then there's guys that I would work with in the future, certainly, even if it had nothing to do with the business that we're in. If somebody said, hey, we're cooking fajitas to raise funds, you know what? I'm on board because you're the right kind of guy to be with, and you create a healthy and prosperous environment, and that's good for us all.
So jumping a little bit sideways here, a little bit backwards in time to the 80s, I see an admiration for Ronald Reagan. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I can remember growing up when obviously Ronald Reagan was the man on the news, and I think as I started to grow and realized what politics consisted of, my fondness for him grew even more, because now I see that he's one of the few leaders that we have had that has stressed relationships, maybe more so than purely politics. And he was able to gather the nations and calm these people and, create relationships when I feel like was great for our country at that time. And obviously his resume is full of resolutions. And I think he got a lot done. I think about that too in our business when we're looking for that guy, that leader, that person on the job site that you want to cinch up and get close with because they're actually the brains behind the organization or the case. I feel like that's probably what Ronald Reagan's objective was more than anything else. Is we got to calm these matters and move forward and produce. And I think he's done that better than any other president since I've been alive. So
yeah, that's great. I'm a Reagan fan, and he's had so many quotes that I thought were really cool. But one of them has nothing to do with tear down this wall or anything like that. He had a speech one time where he talked about we had to move from the industrial economy to the knowledge economy. And in the day and age we're in now, that's still very important. The technology economy or the gig economy is here, but the knowledge economy is what really drives this country. He was one of the very first prominent individuals to bring that to light. So I had to add that as you're talking, because you're telling the story of how he was able to look forward. And I think that's one of the things we forget about some of those great leaders is their ability to take the risk to predict things or to project things.
I feel like if he were here, he could run in 2020 and be the president again.
Yeah.
And not have much of a problem adapting to the changes in our social world or the economy or anything else, because he's that kind of guy who was able to surround himself with the right people and not necessarily proclaim his own greatness, but greatness of our country, and be able to cast that in a forward direction.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm really going to switch gears here because there's not a really good segue, but I'm just going to throw this out there. So I know that you have a love for New Orleans. So let's talk about New Orleans and then coffee. Typically when you ask people their hobbies, coffee is not down there, but I know that you have worked long and hard to perfect making the perfect cup of coffee and the perfect latte. So talk a little bit about that. How did it happen? Did it come from your love of things in New Orleans? I mean, how did all that come about?
Well, I think maybe I have an addictive personality, and those things that I get into, sometimes I get into them big time. But this is going to be kind of crazy how this started. I don't watch a lot of TV, but there's a show called The First 48 that's a documentary on A&E. And I record those, and I'm able to watch the first 45 minutes of each one and go to sleep before I find out who the actual killer was. But either way. But anyway, some of my favorite were actually the homicide department in South Florida. And I would notice these guys, when they would get a call in the middle of the night, they were all drinking coffee out of these little paper cups like you would pump ketchup in at a restaurant. And the guys right there in front of the camera would just act like they had caught their second wind. Well, obviously in our business, there are many, many, many times that we work all day, work all night, work all day, and work all night again. So, we're always looking for that little pick-me-up. And I've never been able to tolerate coffee because I was never old enough to appreciate it, of course. And I just thought that's what old people did, sat on the porch and drink coffee. So I wasn't going there ever. So anyway, I had a guy that was working with me, and he was Cuban, and somehow the conversation came up, and he said, yeah, that's, he told me what it was. And he said, I'll teach you how to make it. I didn't really want to get into it, actually, but so anyway, I'll fast forward through all the graphic stuff where I was drinking out of a cup with him and a bunch of his buddies and all kind of nastiness. But anyway, yeah, throughout those trials and endeavors. And I mean, there have been times, where it's 40 hours later and we're still awake on the job site, and I got to meet with this guy, or I got to drag these cables, or we still need to hook that machine up, whatever the case may be. So I'd had a few cups of this stuff, or a few ounces, we'll say, and really developed a dependency on it. But because me being a bit of a control guy, I figured it would be better if I just started making the coffee myself rather than rely on him. So yeah, after a few more shots of Cuban coffee, I think I really decided that it would be a good opportunity for me to refine my skills as a self-taught barista and figure out how to do this myself. So when I order a cup of coffee at a place and I see them throw a cup under a machine and just press a button and then go try to help somebody else, already my mind is set that this is going to be an inferior product as to what it could be had they shown some care. And I mean, there's a fast food restaurant that everybody knows, the line's out the door because those people act like they care. They really want you to get, it's a chicken sandwich with a pickle on it. Mm-hmm. That's it. But it's the care that they deliver it with, I think, that draws everybody back. So finding a coffee shop, and there are some out there, certainly, but the majority of them are going to be these push button, let's give them something brown and hot and call them next. So yeah, we started doing our own, and I'm better than all those people, and I'm better than anybody in making coffee now. It's just,
I have no doubt.
I can show out. I can do the latte art and all those important things.
Can you draw pictures in the cream on top?
I could pull my photo album out on my phone right now and show you quite an exquisite collection.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We'll look at that after the podcast. So,
okay.
Are you a big reader? I know you well, but I don't know if you're do you read often or not?
That's actually what has steered me to podcasts. That's something that in the past I'd been embarrassed about, but I've got some disabilities that in fact I today would consider to be an ability. I just have a hard time getting through a book because of the way my mind works. And I know there are a lot of people out there like that, but I can go left to right, top to bottom, turn the page at the right time and the whole 9 yards. And then when we get through, I have no idea what I just looked at. Mm-hmm. I was a big magazine guy. And that enabled me to read a couple of paragraphs, glance at the picture, get my mind right, go back, pick out just that information and kind of filter out some of the filler stuff that would be typical. But radio has been my friend. Okay. So I listen to a lot of books on tape. I love, as a matter of fact, on satellite radio, there's a channel that's old radio shows, Gunsmoke and The Whistler and Green Hornet or what, all that stuff really, really captivates a lot of my time. But no, as far as reading, if it's on tape or CD at the Cracker Barrel, there's a good chance I have. But
well, what about podcast? What about other than playing above the line? Obviously, is there a podcast that has made it that has made an impact, or have you been listening to podcasts long enough for you to find?
Yes, it's something that's going to be again embarrassing to admit that it's something I just found. Yeah, I've gotten into podcasts big time, and a friend of mine turned me on to one called Reply All. There's a podcast about the internet. Mm-hmm. And you think, well, that's a pretty broad subject matter. Well, yeah, it is, because it's all stories based on internet activities, and those stories that they found on the internet actually connect you to real life, and then they do some investigative measures. Anyway, it's a lot of fun listening to that stuff, and yeah, when I'm away from the satellite radio, which, again, I listen to a lot of multi-part stuff on that, but podcasts have been, that's just, this is the way to do it, because not necessarily our generation, Alan, because you're old, but the younger generation.
2 years older than you, Owen. Just want to point that out.
Older.
You said older. 2 years.
Okay. Well, you're older. I'll start showing you some more respect. So, but what we're raising is that me now generation, and no longer do these kids wait on Saturday morning to watch cartoons. They want to watch cartoons when they want to watch them, on the device they want to watch them on, in the place they want. And, hey, there's a lot of great things, and I'm not going to get on the soapbox about social media and technology and all those sorts of things, because I know that's not necessarily the subject of the show. But because of that, there's been a wave of information that is presenting itself in a manner that you can pick and choose, whereas it seems like 10 years ago, I was still waiting on that show to come on, or waiting on that radio program in the morning, or whatever the case. But being able to hit a button on a podcast or search for a particular subject that you want, and bada boom, bada bing, it's there, it's ready. You cue it up, you play it, you pause it when you want to. That has been tremendous for me. I'm able to get a lot more done because of that, and not have to schedule around things where I can, I can schedule it around me. So certainly I'm almost all the way through. I'm curious about your other guests because I'm just about caught up on your podcast here. So we're probably going to pick up the pace and get a few more people to pour through here this afternoon or whatever we can do.
We'll stay ahead of it for you.
Because if I lose interest, Alan, I start listening to other podcasts. So I go another direction.
We don't want that. No.
No, we can't have that now.
We need to gain losers. We don't need to gain. We need to gain listeners, not lose listeners. So.
There you go.
All right, last question. So as you're driving back down 65 to Bruton today, you're stopped because the spaceship lands in the middle of 65. A little green guy gets off the spaceship and walks to your truck and knocks on the window and says, "Owen, take me to your leader." Where are you going to take him?
I'd probably say, "You're here, buddy. You are here. I'm in charge of this vessel. Get in and we'll drive around this wreck and go clean up something."
I like the confidence. and the
you just made a mess of the highway. We got to clean it up now.
That's the first, but I'll take it.
Well, you know what? That's something that I'm not typically accused of to my face anyway about being confident, but that's something I think that's lacking in society today. We need more confidence in people that are trying to position themselves to be leaders and to stop listening to those around you and know what's right in your heart and do it. And I think you got to be above and beyond the norm today in terms of a level of confidence to be able to pull that type of stuff off. So, yeah, I like to dance to my own beat if I can.
Very good.
Listen to learn, but then learn how to do it yourself out of what you learn.
That's right. Yep. Absolutely. I like that.
Well, that's a great way to end it. Owen, thanks for joining us. It's been informative and entertaining, so thanks for coming.
Thanks, man.
All right.
Well, thanks for listening to our podcast today. To never miss an episode, subscribe to Playing Above the Line at iTunes and anywhere else you get your podcast. And be sure to leave us a rating. We'd love to know what you think about our show.
To contact us or to stay connected, follow us on social media at HBKCPAS on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.